Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Royal Blue podcast. I am your host, Ian Croll, and sat next to me in the studio for a good old chat about Everton, we have special guest Alan Moyes. Alan, you've got so many titles. I don't know how to introduce you or which one to say. So what are you broadcast journalist? Or?
I've been called a lot of things, Ian, over the time, especially when I was employed at Everton. But yeah, I mean, listen, I guess I'm just a broadcaster, really, and I think journalists sometimes is pushing it, but yeah, I think obviously my background with Everton, I think a lot of people, see my background at Everton and the positions I held there, So yeah, but call me anything you like. Just don't call me Sunday.
How are things anyway?
That's an old Joe Royal one, by the way.
Right, that's I've gone over my head that one. Sorry, I do apologise.
It's all right.
All good? How are
yeah,
things?
all good, mate. Yeah, we're going well. Recently left Sky from a sort of permanent position, and I work for them freelance now. Also started a podcast, the All-Time podcast, which is going well. We're enjoying it. It's not an Everton one. I think people thought I was going to do an Everton one, but I mean, we've got Tony Grant as my co-host, and to be honest with you, it's very difficult to stay away from Everton at times, because obviously everyone we know, both of us, have got some sort of Everton link. So it's a bit difficult, but we have, we wanted to talk general football and deeper. We didn't just want it to be an opinion. And there's nothing wrong with them, but we just didn't. We wanted to look deeper into the game and look at different aspects of the game, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can add podcaster, I guess, then to your
podcaster as well. Titles. Yeah. I've done all kinds. I've had more jobs than someone who works at a job centre. I promise you, mate. Over my years, you wouldn't believe some of the jobs I've done.
Oh well, experience. That's what it's all about.
Well,
isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we will come on to the podcast. It's obviously on YouTube. You can get it on
YouTube,
Spotify.
Apple. Yeah, on the usual places. Yeah.
So the All-Time podcast there with the former Everton player Tony Grant. How is Tony? Is he all good?
He's great. Yeah, he's great. I mean, I had the chance to do it with what you would probably view as, sort of more sort of star names, if you like. But the great thing about Tony is he's a thinker, and he always was when we were at the club together in the 90s. He would always have a proper in-depth conversation with you about everything, which was rare in those days. Usually it was someone shoving a window wiper up your exhaust pipe or something. So, but Tony is a thinker and someone who I respect a lot. So, yeah, I mean, Tony's great. He's a top guy.
Well, in the time that we've got with you today, obviously there's plenty that I'd like to discuss and kind of delve into. First off, can you take us kind of like back to the very beginning for you when it comes to Everton? Obviously, it's the Royal Blue podcast, this is Everton, but we are going to speak about other things as well. Yeah. For our audience who might not know your full Everton story, how did it all start for you?
Well, so a strange one, really. Back when I was about 8 or 10, I come from a family of 6 brothers, six lads, 2 girls, and my dad were all staunch Liverpool fans. I was the only Everton fan, and the reason it came about was I used to do neighbours, cut hedges for neighbours or wash cars and things like that, as you did in the 70s. And we had a neighbour across the road called Mrs. McKee, and Mrs. McKee was the cleaner for Harry Catterick's office at Belfield, would you believe? Mm-hmm. So I used to cut the hedge and wash the car, and one day she said to me, would you like to go to the match, to watch Everton? So I said, oh, yeah, as a kid then, you take anything, So I said, yeah, I'll definitely do it. So she gave me these 2 tickets. Little did I know it was actually for the reserves, because what happened in those days, as people will know at my age, whenever the first team were away, the reserves would play at Goodison, and same with Anfield, Liverpool would play their reserves. So she gave me these 2 tickets. I couldn't get anyone else to go with me. So I was on my own, so, and I would go off to see, and I remember seeing a sort of 15, 16-year-old Ronnie Goodless, coming on, and playing alongside Bob Latchford for the reserves. Bob was coming back from injuries, and things like that. And so that was my start, really, as I had Liverpool won the FA Cup, and I think 74 was it, against Newcastle. And I had a little wobble for about 8 seconds, 10 seconds, because where we used to live in Old Swan, the team bus would always come down Queen's Drive. And I remember them coming down. I went with my mates, to watch the bus come past. And Kevin Keegan smiled at me and waved at me. And just as I was walking back home, I thought for a second, should I? And then I said, no, I can't. And, and I stuck with Everton. And that's how, I think my first game was against Birmingham. It was something like a 1-1 or 2-2 draw, if I remember rightly, back in the early 70s. And, we sort of come to watch Everton as a fan, really, in a really difficult time, really. I mean, it was only sort of 78, really, growing up. That was really a decent season in that time. But no, as we all say, once Everton's touched you, and that was pretty much it, really. I've always stayed, and through the days when I remember in between the 2 league wins, where we played at Oxford and Liverpool playing at Leicester, and they'd won 3-0, and we got beat by Oxford, and I was watching it in or sort of listening to it on the radio in one room, and all my brothers and my dad were watching the Leicester game for Liverpool in the other room. Of course, full-time whistle comes, and Liverpool have pretty much won the league. And they all come piling in on top of me, So I've had my time, I've had a difficult time over the years, and I've had to stick it with it, But yeah, that's how I became an Everton fan. And so you sort of grown up on, tough times, and it actually helps you in a way. You enjoy that. Like the 80s were fantastic, even though I was actually driving coaches abroad during the 80s. When I was actually driving through Belgium and Holland and all this, on the night when we won against Rapid Vienna, So it's I sort of missed. I didn't miss a lot of the 80s, but I missed the big moments like the Bayern Munich game and stuff like that because I was working abroad. But now it's in my blood, and and things have gone on from there.
Was there any moments other than obviously you mentioned your first game there against Birmingham City? Yeah. Was there any other moment where you just thought there's literally no going back? I am an Everton fan, and that's
it's just I'll tell you people talk about character building. I went to the 3 Aston Villa finals. I always remember I actually got a ticket, would you believe? I bought a ticket off Duncan McKenzie.
The League Cup ones, was it?
Yeah, the League Cup, the trilogy of games, you can call them that. And I remember standing outside Belfield looking for a ticket. We had one, me and this friend of mine, and I needed this other one. And Duncan McKenzie came out. He was a player, and he said, I've got one for sale, and I bought the ticket off him. And I was delighted, and I went, and of course that was really difficult. 3 games, we had the euphoria, in the second game at Hillsborough where Bob Latchford scored an equaliser near the end, and and then of course Old Trafford when we got beat, and that was just pure heartache, and I don't mind admitting, I sort of cried on the way home from that, I must have been about 14, 15, I think at the time, and you sort of went through, and that's what it was like being an Everton fan at that time. It was really difficult. You had to stick with it. You had to be resolute.
Like now.
Well, it is a little bit. Yeah. Well, funny enough, we were speaking about this the other day. When you look at it, I think I was bad. We had wins. We had victories, and if you're 29, 30 as a fan now, you've seen nothing. And that. Yeah. That's quite damning, really. I joined the club just after the season after the '95 Cup win, which some people blame me for the drought ever since. But when you look at it, if someone had said that you won't win a trophy now, and till at least 2025, 26, you'd have thought they were mad. Yeah, but absolutely, that's how it's been.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be old enough for the '95 Cup win. I think I was like 8 or 9, so I still didn't hit home as probably what it would do today. Yeah. But like say, you are right. Anyone within the 30s just hasn't seen anything, and obviously the disappointment, isn't it? I have got one thing in common with you though. All my family were Reds, so my granddad and my dad were all Reds, and I've turned out to be a Blue. But that is, it's not just because I chose. That was partly because of my auntie's a massive Blue, so she took me the game.
Yeah, there's always someone I think who influences you.
Exactly. Yeah. just want to move on to the communication side of things that you've worked in with the club. I just find it kind of fascinating to see how all that has developed, probably from your time in the 90s and obviously the noughties to now. Really, it's probably completely different to what it was like 10 years ago. So you've obviously had a number of communications roles, haven't you? Everton, Blackburn.
I joined. I mean, I was at Radio Merseyside. I'd just been given a full-time job at Radio Merseyside doing this morning sport. And I got a phone call from a guy who was from Cliff Finch's office. Cliff Finch being a former director and sort of right-hand man to Peter Johnson. And this guy said to me, Cliff Finch would like to speak to you about a possible role at Everton. Can you come over to Park Foods? Which, I followed a long line of, famous people going over there. I was the first infamous one. And anyway, I went over there, and I was delighted to be working for the BBC full-time at the time. And they said, we heard you on the radio, and you're clearly a passionate Blue, and we want to bring in a press officer. And strangely, and this might sound fascinating, shocking to people, but Premier League clubs didn't have press officers in those days. Really, there was no such. There was people who did the press, but there was no one who was a sort of designated media communication person. So there was me, there was Claire Tomlinson, who was at Arsenal at the time. And Paul Mace, who was at Leicester, and then pretty much that was it. There was a guy at Newcastle whose name escapes me, and there was a guy I can't remember his name now. It'll come to me, but he was at Huddersfield, bizarrely, and they were in the league below, But so there was only sort of half a dozen of us.
Still a big team now at the time, you would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and so. I remember Cliff Finch saying to me, look, I know it'll be a big decision for you to leave the BBC and all the rest of it, but if you think, how long do you want to think about it? And I said, give me 4 or 5 seconds, and because, listen, who's going to turn down a job at Everton? And, as an Everton fan and, someone who wanted to do that line of work as well. So that's how it started. And, I had my new blazer on and, with the badge on the front. And that was it. And it was at a time, really, a real transition of media. I mean, the internet wasn't really going at that point. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like I'm 96,
absolutely.
But it's bizarre to think that, in 95, 96, there was to get a website or an internet site, was new. That was, and I always remember we'd signed, can't remember which player it was now, whether it was Duncan Ferguson. It wouldn't have been Duncan. It might have been Gaza. Although that was a bit later on. No, it was earlier. Whoever it was, it might have been Gary Speed, I think. And we signed the player, and I put, because we'd got a new Everton website, and I put a story on the Everton website 5 minutes before the press conference. I mean, it's normal that today, but then there was a thing called the Mersey Mafia, and there were all these sort of, anyone who knew anyone at that time, they would be able to name all of those people, and they sort of rule the roost, as far as the media were concerned. They, and I know yourself and the guys here at the Echo will laugh at this, but they just used to walk around the training ground, car park, and just speak to any player who was coming out to their car, and there was no control or anything like that. I mean, it's mad.
Wouldn't think about that today, would you?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't even imagine it. And so I remember one of them actually offered me out.
Because you put this story up.
We put this story up, and he said, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Well, because we're the club, we can do that." And that was the change of mentality, in the fact that the media, or the press in particular, ran the club in club's media, really. And of course managers like that as well, because they could manipulate it all, and
of course, yeah.
And of course, when this new sort of newfangled, if for want of a better term, thing came in, and they were really, really upset that we'd run with the story 5 minutes before. It was only 5 minutes, And he actually said, "Right, come, me and you in the car park," and I was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, And anyway, you'll be pleased to know it never comes to fruition, And,
I'm sure you would have won.
Well, yeah, well, I would have done, actually, knowing thinking of the person. But no, listen, it was just a crazy time, and it was all new, and people, we were putting noses out of joint, and we had Radio Everton, and we had, because the club, in fairness, under Peter Johnson and Cliff, was quite innovative, really. There weren't many clubs. It was only Manchester United who had a radio station. We started with a TV Everton, which was only in-house. It wasn't broadcast on a channel. And not many clubs were doing this. So it's a real change. And we had, in conjunction with the Echo, we did the Evertonian magazine, and Ken Rogers and Dave Prentice would do the program for us, and so it was all new, and it was all changing, and it was a difficult time, but it was also exciting as well. Things were, you were able to try new things and do different things, but and then you had to get the players on board and managers on board, and of course the way, even still to this day, it's difficult balance as a communication guy to keep everybody happy. You're going to upset somebody at some point.
Just touching on what you're kind of saying there, where that was kind of the beginning of the clubs kind of taking control of their own content or media on their own platforms.
Yeah.
Is there a successful definition or way of doing things now? Because I think a lot of fans, and this is not just Everton fans, a lot of fans can be critical of their own clubs for not communicating enough. Is there a specific way that you would do that now? Obviously, I know you've got social media and stuff like that, but it's obviously got to be difficult because you want to relay information, but you can't relay too much information at the same time.
I think there's a golden rule I've always adopted, because as you said before, I've done Everton twice, Blackburn Rovers as well, and I think, listen, I don't want to speak for fans of those two clubs, but I think a lot of the fans would say that I was always straight and honest with them, and I think that's, and people have to realise, when you say honest, it's not about telling everything, because you can't do that in football, because there are a lot, and people think there's always some, because it's stardom and all the rest of it, they think there's some sort of conspiracy theory behind that. That's not normally the case. Of course, there are instances where that, and we've seen them, with our club, with Everton down the years. But I think, because there are commercial sensitivities in a football club where you can't say certain things, and it would be detrimental to the club if you did. But I think if you have an honesty, even to the point of saying, look, we can't talk about that. I've always been the word when I first went to Everton. There was hardly ever any real engagement, what you would call engagement, from the club. I mean, it was basically a firefighting most weeks. I always remember our manager, must have been Joe Royal, had gone, and some guy rang me up and said, is it true about Louis van Gaal? There were some rumours about Louis van Gaal, and I had, to my shame, I'd never heard of him, and it was transfer window, you see, and I said, look, we're not buying any new players until the new manager comes in. And he said, well, Louis van Gaal's a manager. I said, of course he is, and you had to blag it, and sort of, and, so, yeah, I mean, there's certain things which you can tell and which you can't tell. But with engagement, I think the most important thing is that you can look a fan in the eye and be honest with them and be straight with them. And sometimes that means saying no, but one of the things when I went to Everton, certainly when I went back in 2013, the first thing I told the staff was the first answer can never be no to any media. And it's a real bugbear because I've had the benefit of working both sides of the media. And I'm sure this will resonate with you, the worst thing is when a press officer says to you, oh, no, that won't be the case, without even asking, and that's not the role. The role is to try and help it, in those early days, in particular, we had what I called media prevention officers. Not.
It's okay.
Yeah, like
so it's in the title, then, really, isn't it?
Yeah, they wanted to prevent the media, and that shouldn't be. It's absolutely the other way around. You should be looking. I mean, obviously, we want good content and we want good stories as best we can. But some of the best stories are the negative stories, and that's when you earn your money as a PR man and as a communicator, is when things are bad. Anyone can be a good press officer in good times, you know. But when things are difficult, when people need answers and when people need that, you know, football fans don't ask a lot, even though people might be shocked at that. They don't really ask a lot. They don't want to run the club as much as people think they do. They just want to see it run properly, you know. And burying your head in the sand is just not the way forward, you know, for me.
Just 3 points on a Saturday would do as well, to be honest, wouldn't it?
Well, as I think it was Peter Johnson that used to say to me, you know, when you lose in football games, even the pies taste nasty, and it's so right. You know, nothing is right at the club when you're losing. When you win, and everything's right, and it's not necessarily right. You know, but
is there any difficult communication moments that you can recall from your time at Everton?
How long?
Any specific one that you can remember?
Yeah, we had loads. You know, I mean, that season, I always remember one of the. I mean, there's some which I probably wouldn't mention on this, you know, which were really difficult, which never always got out into the public domain. But you know, one that sticks out is when we were going to go down against Coventry, you know, and you know, the game against Coventry on the Sunday, last game of the season, and it was really, really tough time for everybody at the club, in fairness. And I always remember going down to Belfield, and again in those days, everybody did one-to-ones. You know, what we call one-to-ones. You know, there was none of this group, you know, press conference type thing. And I said to Howard Kendall, who was the manager at the time, I said, look, what I'm going to do, Howard, I said, I'm going to do one interview for the radio, one interview for television, and one interview for the press. And he went, good lad, good idea, lad. You know, because the car park was full. Yeah, there was so much interest because it looked like, I mean, there was like 100. You know, reasons for Everton to go down and one to stay up, you know, and we, thankfully, we had the one. But you know, so he said to me, okay, that's a great idea. So I go down before we bring him down to the car park to do the interviews. And I said to them, I sort of, you know, gave an announcement, we're going to do one. And of course, they all went mad, especially the press lads, because they all were used to one-on-ones. And, this is terrible. I said, well, this is what we're going to do. You know, it's too many people here, blah, 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 you know. And again, that was that change of control. Yeah. And then Howard came down and he said, they went straight over to him. Howard, Alan Myers is saying, you know, that we're only going to do one interview. And he looked at me and he said, what are you doing that for, lad? He said, you know, let the guys have their one-to-ones. And I'm like, sort of, oh my God, you know. But it was genius because all of a sudden, they loved him. They hated me, that was
your job in a way.
That was my job. Yeah, I mean, that, you know, and that was the sort of way it was. But he had instantly got them on his side for what was going to be a difficult round of interviews. You know, and it was a genius. And that's what you had. I'm not so sure you have that these days. You know, with managers. I mean, of course they're clever. The managers. You can't be a Premier League manager and not be clever, you know, as much as many people would think the opposite to that at times. Believe me, you have to have something about you to run it, you know, to manage a football club in the Premier League. But yeah, I mean, so there were difficult times, you know. I mean, you know, that Coventry game, you know, we had Peter Johnson had to be frisked, you know, and I had to be frisked before I went to see him. You know, we actually recorded a message. One if we'd stayed up, one if we'd gone down. And I remember him saying to me as I walked out of the chairman's office, you know, if you play the wrong one, you know what's going to happen, don't you? And I thought, yeah, I do know what's going to happen if I play the wrong one. But and I think I've still got that recording somewhere, you know, when he talked about being relegated, you know, because we knew we couldn't do it after the game. It would have been, and it was right. It was bedlam, you know. But I was strangled twice as Everton press officer, you know, by fans. And again, you know, people say, oh, you know, that's terrible. But do you know what? It's passion, and I think as a press officer or as a communications guy, you've got to understand that passion. You've got to, especially at a club like Everton. You know, there are many clubs where you don't quite get that, but at Everton and you know and the bigger clubs, you'd be like, you know, that's there for a reason. And you know, you don't have that. I think you of course you don't condone any sort of physicality. You know, but at the same time, you've got to understand how fans feel. This is something which gets right to the heart of people. You know, it's I've seen people shake, you know, grown men shake in front of players, and And I think, wow, because you lose that when you're in the business, you'll know you lose that sort of, I don't know, that fantastic feel that you sort of lose it a little bit. It takes the shine off it being in the media, I think. I'm certainly being in a football club, but yeah, we had our difficult moments certainly in the 90s, and that was a tough time at times.
Just what's occurred to me as well is in terms of difficult moments, this is probably something that's occurred over in modern times, because obviously football owners have kind of always been there.
Yeah.
But in terms of responding to kind of a post-match controversy or a refereeing decision, I mean, we've had examples. They just refer to me notes here. I don't recall the time, just for context, when Nottingham Forest posted an official tweet after losing at Goodison 2-0. It was back in April 2024. For context, he basically just slammed the poor decisions against Everton and, called out the VAR official for being a Luton supporter. So the Nottingham Forest communications team or media team have had to deal with, obviously that's been coming from the owner, hasn't it, Marinakis?
Yeah.
Put yourself in your shoes. Like, what would you do? How would you navigate that situation when well, he's the owner, he can do what he wants?
I think luckily, I had sort of owners. I worked for owners who were quite level-headed in that respect. I mean, Bill Kenwright for many years. Peter Johnson never really spoke. Bill Kenwright was well-versed in how to deal with media and what to say and when to say it at the right time. So I didn't really have... It was a little bit different to Blackburn.
Okay.
We had our moments there, shall we say. And that was difficult. But again, they weren't vocal, the owners. But yeah, I mean, there's a line, which, and it's difficult for people, because I've seen it at Everton over the years where the staff are in a really difficult position because some people demand things which are not unobtainable, but certainly, difficult for those people to do that, and they have to, and at the end of the day, it's their job, and they have a wage to worry about, and so sometimes you have to just conform, and some things are not fair to put that pressure on. I mean, I've been put in over the years in many difficult positions, where you're not quite sure what to say for the right thing or the wrong thing, So, and I've had blast down my ear, because I've said something which, But on the whole, as I said to you, and it goes back to that core value again, if you're being straight with people, and being honest with people to a point, you should be okay, and I don't think anyone can really criticize you, for being straight with people and trying, and I always remember when I went back to the club in 2013, there was a big thing where we were trying to sell Fellaini. Or we were going to sell Fellaini and Baines, if you remember, Leighton Baines. And I remember ringing Bill Kenwright up, and one of the things I was very different. I was a very different animal coming back in 2013 than I was that left in 2002, whatever it was, 2001, 2002. And that was because I knew a hell of a lot more about the business, because I'd had 12 years at Sky going to World Cup finals and Champions League finals and dealing with all kinds of characters. So I said to Bill, and I'll never forget it, I said to him, look, I need to know, Bill, because I'm not going to go to the fans and say we're doing this, this and this if we're not doing it. Yeah. So you need to be honest with me, and that's the thing. You've got to get yourself in a position where you can challenge the owners and say, and I think they respond to that, even being honest. I think they'll always push you, to try and not let you do that, but you've got to, if you do push them and if you do put them under pressure, I don't know about Marinakis, I wouldn't want to test that, to be honest, but,
Don't think any of us would they?
But I always remember, I said to Bill, Bill, I need to know. I said, are we going to sell Leighton Baines? And he went, watch my lips. We are not selling Leighton Baines. So I said, okay. So I said, what about Fellaini? And he said, I'll speak to you later, son. And he walked away. And I knew then, without him saying it, I knew what was going to happen. And it transpired, that's what did happen, And that is huge for a press officer or a communications director. You've got to have the trust of the owner. You've got to have, and in fairness, if we're looking at the Marinakis thing, these people have to live with their comments. They have to stand by what they say. And to me, I would have just said, well, that's what he thinks. So, whether I agree with it or not is not my business. It's that's not my job. My job isn't to agree with it. My job is to stand by it, and that's his comment. So yeah, it is awkward. It can be difficult at times.
No, I find it fascinating. Certainly how things have developed with the introduction of owners who are a little bit more vocal, and how difficult it must be for media teams and stuff like that. Moving on slightly, from your Sky Sports vantage point, in terms of Everton in the kind of wider media ecosystem, I guess if you want to call it that, how do you think Everton are perceived compared to kind of other teams? Because I know as Everton fans we're always conscious of how Everton are perceived. Are we a big club? How do we see ourselves, compared to others? I mean, how do you see that?
Well, I think when I was at Sky, we used to get quite a lot of criticism as we didn't like Everton, or we weren't interested. I can tell you honestly, working at Sky, there's loads of Evertonians who always trying to push the agenda, and get Everton on the stories. I think the reality, we talked before about the fans who have had 30 years of nothing. And the reality is as a club, we've been in a little bit of a no man's land. Thankfully, we're not the Everton from 98, 97, 98. I mean, we have been there the last few years. And you will see the more attention we get is either when you're very down the bottom and very in a risk of relegation, or when you're challenging for Europe. When you're in that group of middle clubs, which we were for, a good while, I know David Moyes did a great job when he was here first time getting the club into Europe on a pretty regular basis. But you're in that sort of, as I say, I call it a no man's land where you're not really the story. So you're sort of like bypassed, if you like, because the stories are down the bottom and up the top. So I think we've suffered for that, in fairness. And I think nationally we're not, it's one thing which I sort of thought about when I came back in 2013, because I sort of wanted to get that better, and get more respect because we weren't getting the respect from the national journalists and stuff. I think that actually happens now. I think in particular we look at, Henry Winter, who often talks about Everton and national journalists do, and I think the stadium and things like that really help.
Yeah,
but those things. But it's a difficult one. You can't force the agenda.
But do you see it as you've kind of said it, to this question, and all your colleagues in Sky, and I know me, Chris and Joe all feel the same, but do you see it from the position that you've been in as a broadcast journalist as like a responsibility? Obviously, you're an Everton fan yourself, same here, so do you feel that responsibility to push the agenda?
Of course. Well, I mean, I have a very different view to a lot of people in the business. I think, it's on the story, really. It shouldn't be about the team. It should be about what the story leads. And there have been some great stories. That's not, in reality, how the business works. You'll know, especially these days with what they call clickbait and getting figures up. This business now is a very much figures-run business. You have to be, because it's really competitive. So, there's lots of really nice stories that go by the way, and they don't get the credit or the publicity they deserve. Why? Because it won't get figures, and that's the difficult challenge that the people at the club have. I think they've got some great people working at the club, but it's very difficult for them. That's why the stadium has been such a revelation, because they've been able to, such an exciting. I wrote a piece the other day. Actually, I have a column on a Monday, and I sort of wrote about the fact that I'm getting a little bit uncomfortable with us talking about us as Evertonians talking about the stadium now, because we feel as if we've been doing it for a long time. And what sparked that thought was when the Hill Dickinson was used for the Rugby League Ashes tour, and it was other people starting to talk about it, and I thought, now that's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
It's so much better than us talking about it, because people will just think, they never stop going on about the stadium, which I've been guilty of myself, So in that respect, I think, there are challenges. But I think if we start to go up the table, and the owners now that have come in, you know, they look like they're very steady owners, and they'll build. You know, I think I read somewhere on Twitter the other week, you know, evolution, not revolution, and you know, and I think that's right for Everton. And I think if that goes well, you know, you'll start seeing the national. I mean, I think that's changed a lot more now. I think that the spread of stories and spread of coverage is a lot better now than it was. But you know, still the big stories, and you know, and either at the top or the bottom of the of the Premier League will dominate.
I think your comment or your line there about Everton being in no man's land is spot on. I've got a friend who I'm not going to name because he'll be lynched, basically.
Right.
I can't remember what year it was. It was a good couple of years ago now. I think it was before COVID, to be honest. And I think Everton was finishing mid-table. And he basically said, I'd rather Everton be in a relegation battle than be mid-table because at least it's exciting. It's at least being talked about. And I think that is the issue, that we have been kind of mid-table mediocrity for a long time. Don't get me wrong, we've had ups and downs, but it can get a little bit just boring and mundane. And
well, you start questioning everything, don't you? You know,
yeah. You don't want to go through relegation battles again, but at least it was a little bit of excitement. But you wouldn't want that, would you? Week in, week out.
It's not the first time, you know, on radio or television I've heard, or even in the press, you know, I've heard people say, I don't know what Everton are, you know, what are Everton? Now, that, for me, someone of my age, is outrageous, you know, because, you know, I know what this club is. I know how big this club should be. And I know, hopefully, how big this club will be in the future, because they've got, you know, I always felt even when I was working there in the 90s, I've always felt we were held back by Goodison in many ways. As much as I loved it, you know, we were held back by it. And I think I'm really excited about what the possibilities are now from a waterfront location, and being, you've seen, you know, the Euro 2028 announcement last week, and how fantastic that was, and the excitement. I could feel the Evertonians getting excited, and it's not even about Everton, you know, it's about the Euros. So there's a sort of sense of pride, if you like, you know, and that's what will build, those type of things will build Everton to being back where I think it belongs, you know. But no, you know, it's no good being sort of mid-table and you know, bouncing around that sort of area. You know, we need to be the top end of the table, really, to start getting that notoriety.
Is the perception not like a generational thing? Because we were talking about, you know, Everton haven't won a trophy in 30 years. So based on that, anyone who's, say, between 16 to 18 or 18 to 30 will have seen Everton do absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and what you have to think about, if you take the Evertonian out of it, and you're looking at maybe a national journalist or a radio station or whatever, and you look from their perspective, and it's very difficult because none of us want to do that. You know, even the 18 to 30 people, you know, don't want to do that. But if you take your Evertonian eyes off it, you can understand when people say, I hear it often. You probably heard it yourself. I don't know where Everton are going to finish, or, you know, I don't, you know, and what I said before, you know, what is Everton? You know, you hear people, you know, and I mean, some of them are a little bit extreme, you know, for the clickbait we mentioned before. You know, they say, well, Everton are, you know, they're going to be struggling relegation and all the rest of it, and that's not necessarily the case, you know, but you can sort of understand why they're not jumping up and down and recognising the Everton that I remember. You know, and anyone over sort of 40 will remember. So it's a difficult challenge for the club, you know, and I think the reality is the only thing that will change that is success on the pitch. You know, and like it changes so much. You know.
You've touched upon the stadiums, Goodison Park and Hill Dickinson. I mean, how do you think the club have managed that? You know, the transformation or transition from, obviously, Goodison Park, spiritual home, to Hill Dickinson. I mean, I guess winning games at Hill Dickinson has helped, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. I mean, listen, we were always going to be, you know, at the behest of results in the new stadium.
Yeah.
You know, that only the players and the manager can solve that problem. No one at the club can do that. However, when I was at Goodison for the last season in particular, I spent a lot of time there, you know, with Sky and doing it because we did a documentary and stuff. And And I'll be honest with you, I was terrified. You know, I thought, how are they going to do this? You know, because it was mainly the staff that were at Goodison who were doing it. You know, and all of a sudden they were going from this thing which they did like the back of their hand, they knew like the back of their hand, to this completely new. Everything has changed. You know, the catering side of it, the hospitality side of it, everything is very, very different to what Goodison was. And I thought, I actually, if I'm being honest, I expected a lot more problems than there has been. I did expect a few problems. I thought, this is not going to be easy, this. But I have to say, I think it's been brilliant. I think the way they've coped with it has been absolutely fantastic. And it is, by and large, the same people who were at Goodison who've done it.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, there's more staff at the new stadium because of the size of the place. You know, that is no mean feat to move to a stadium like that. You know, and
it's unprecedented, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely unprecedented. And you know, and most of the problems, you know, like, there's not many of that problems. Okay, there's been some issues, I know, in a couple of the lounges or the sort of concourses, which I brought to my attention on social media. But most of the problems are non-Everton problems, you know, like the traffic and all that sort of thing. That's not the club's responsibility, although it's a big thing for the club. It's not their responsibility. So most of the issues, I think, that the stadium has had, and it hasn't had that many really, I've come from an external position really, you know, and I think I honestly, you know, and I'll be the first to say if I didn't think that was the case, but I think the people at the club deserve massive credit for the way they've handled all that, you know, because I must admit, you know, as a director of comms and everything, I'd sit there and I'd think, God, how are they going to manage that? And how are they going to do this? And I thought, I don't think I'd like to do that, you know, to be honest. I was thinking to myself, you know, I don't envy them in any way, shape or form, you know, but fair play to them. They've done a great job. In
terms of Goodison and the final day, obviously, was it everything that you kind of hoped for?
No. Do you know, honestly, I didn't enjoy the last day at all. I think it was a little bit of an anticlimax. I don't mean it wasn't good, because they did everything, you know, and there's only so much they could do. But I don't know. I think I'd built myself up so much. My moment was I was working for Sky on the day, and my moment was being at the Titanic Hotel with all these former players. I won't say all players, because a lot of them weren't, but for all these former players in there mixed up. It was like being in some sort of Everton fantasy camp, you know. It was like there was a guy, a lot of people watching this won't remember him, who was called, oh God, his name escaping me now, centre half, who am I thinking of? Aston Villa. Anyway, you know what, I can't think.
Yeah.
Can't think of his name. I can see him, but I can't think of his name. There was a story there, and many years ago, I used to work in a fish and chip shop. He was in the 70s. God, I can see him. I can't believe I can't remember his name. He's one of my favourite players. Anyway, so when I worked in the fish and chip shop in Old Swan, it was close to Belfield, and he moved in. They always lived in digs in those days, and he moved in to the house across the road from the fish and chip shop, and he used to come into our chippy, and I used to serve him, you know. And I always remember, oh God, what's his name? And anyway, I was at Belfield. We'd just got to Belfield as a young lad with my mates, and the players come out in their cars, and he'd come out, and we'd literally just arrived, and he said to me, "Oh, right, so I think you recognise me from the chip shop." And he said, "Do you need a lift home?" And I said, "Yeah." You know, I didn't, you know, but the chance of getting in a player's car and going out, you know, just couldn't give it up. So I went all the way back to Old Swan, and then I had to run all the way back to Belfield again. But that was, you know, oh God, it's really annoying me that I can't think of his name. You know, it's just gone from my head. Anyway, we met in the Titanic on this last day.
Yeah.
And I went over to him and I said, "You won't remember this." I said, "But you used to live across the road in Old Swan." He went, "Oh yeah, he misses such and such his digs." And he said, "I don't remember that." I said, "Well, I used to work in the chippy." He went, "You the little blonde kid in the chippy?" I said, "Yeah." And he remembered me.
Yeah.
And it was just the most oh God, what's his name? Anyway, I've had a moment, and he remembered me. He's got better memory than I have, that's for sure. And he remembered me from like 40 odd years ago.
Yeah.
It was incredible, and it was a sort of moment which, and I was in a bit of a daze, if I'm being honest, a bit like I am now. But I was in a bit of a daze on the last day. I didn't know how to react, and I come out a bit early. I didn't stay. I waited to see the players come on the pitch at the end, the former players. And then I came out, and Goodison Road was just rammed, with people, and there was balls going up in the air, and I just thought, I can't handle this, and I so it was really weird.
Bittersweet.
I thought, it wasn't that I was sad. I just didn't know how to feel, because we'd heard the news that the women were going to carry on with Goodison, so
that's right.
You couldn't get morbidly sad, because Goodison was going to be knocked down next week, like I did with Belfield. Broke my heart when I saw the builders. I went there one day to do a little feature for whoever I was. It must have been Sky, and I saw the bulldozers knocking the walls down. I broke my heart, because of course my office was there, in the 90s. But yeah, it was odd. The Goodison last day was very odd.
No, I don't disagree with you. To be honest, it was a crazy day, wasn't it? But I mean, I felt the build up to, but then it went over too quick for me. I know that sounds a bit silly, but obviously with the early kick off, and then it was kind of just over on the day then.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it was sort of, because the build up was massive, wasn't it? We'd I mean, like I say, I've been putting a document. I'd spoken to everyone who lived and breathed Everton at that point, and it was great. And I don't know whether I was expecting something spectacular, which you can't do. It's a stadium, that's all. And I think the match sort of dampened a bit of the occasion, didn't it? Really, wasn't much of a game, really. And so no, it was a very strange day, I have to say.
In terms of on-field matters, I mean, this is the first time we're actually speaking about actual football and on-field matters. What's your assessment of Everton's season so far? Are we ahead, behind, on par with your expectations?
It's funny enough. I think it's somewhere where I thought it would be, and that is and it's a typical Everton thing. I've got hope. There's things which make me feel good about it. But there's always that nagging little, and I think that's how the team have played in different games. You look at things and you think, God, sometimes we play really well. We've got a lot of creativity in that final third. We obviously struggled converting that creativity, but I think it's hard to really assess it, because I think the next month or so is going to really sort of tell us where we are and where we're not. When the games come thick and fast in December, that will be a really big challenge, I think, for Everton. And we've got some tough games coming up. But I think we've done okay. I think there are certain games which I thought we could have done better in. Aston Villa, West Ham. I thought with a little bit more, not endeavour, because they always try hard. I've not seen a game, and we've seen them over the last few years where it just looked as if they weren't at it. I've not seen a game like that really yet this season. But then I didn't expect that under David Moyes. One thing you'll have under David Moyes is they'll give everything, in the game. They might not be good enough in the end, but they'll give everything. And you look at the Manchester City game, and completely separate people said to me, if you switched Haaland and Beto in that game, Everton would have won. Now I know that sounds a bit obvious, but I think what they were trying to say was the only thing we were missing was a finisher. And so we matched them, I think. And that's real. That gives me real hope. Certainly over the last few years we've seen, but the uncertainty off the pitch has had a lot to do with that. We've now got certainty off the pitch, and that helps managers, it helps players. Because all this rubbish about players we don't really take much notice of that is nonsense. Players take notice, managers take notice. And when you've got stability in a football club, it's so much better. And I think we've got stability, and I think that shows in a lot of the performances. I just wish, I said it at the start of the season, I knew we needed another striker, and I'm no genius, I'm no tactical genius, but I got quite a lot of stick actually on social media about it. But I could see for different reasons these players will struggle. These two players, and again, you can't criticise Beto for the work rate he puts in and the endeavour and the trying, but it's just not work for him at the moment. Barry is a different thing altogether. I think he needs to find his feet. Coming into a new league like this is difficult. And I think he will come good eventually.
In terms of the stability that you obviously spoke about, do you think that's filtered down through the fans? I mean, how would you characterise the fans' mood now? Because let's face it, it's been a tough ride, hasn't it, over the past couple of years? You don't need to name anything, but obviously PSR, point deductions, fear of relegation. Yeah. The stability does seem to be there now. Don't get me wrong, ups and downs so far this season. Points-wise, it's so close in that league. Expectations could still be there for a good season. But the fans, when you speak to fans, does there seem to be that buoyancy of we can do something over the next couple of years?
I think there'll always be, for a long time, there'll always be a caution with Everton fans because we've been here before and, many times. And I describe Everton fans as being punch drunk, at the moment. I think they've had, a lot thrown at them over the last few years, specifically in the last couple of years. It's really been tough. I can only commend the fan base, for what they put through and what they've done over the last number of seasons. But that has always been the case, really. The fans, strangely enough, when we were more successful, it wasn't as vociferous, the fan base, but when Everton fans, when they need to come together, they will. But I think there's a slightly cautious attitude from a lot of the fans still. I think they need to be reassured further, and I think a couple of transfer windows will change that. There was a lot of good work done in the summer. I think not as much as there should have been, or could have been, should we say? I think the defensive positions needs to be looked at. I think the striker position definitely. I'd make that a priority for the second part of the season. Not easy in January, but yeah, I think the fans, are giving TFG a real chance. I think they see that they are controlled. Sorry, that's my phone going off. I think the fans see that there's a control to TFG's ownership, which is good. And I think from what I hear, and I don't know them well, but from what I hear, they are very steady and they take things, in their stride, which is good. That's the sort of ownership I think we need. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be pleased about. I'd like to see a couple more wins, to be honest, to get it going. Because just when you feel as if we're getting somewhere, there seems to be a little drop off, and and David Moyes won't like that. One thing people talked about David Moyes coming back, and one thing about him is, no matter who you are, whether you're a journalist going into Finch Farm, cleaner, a chef, player, there's a certain standard that he demands, and I like that, and I think that's what's been missing over the years for Everton, certainly in the last 7 to 8 years. That has been the focus of that has been away, and now he's brought that back, and I think people respect the club again now, and I think that's great. So, you've got to win games. You're only as good as your last performance, really. You see it. It's week by week, isn't it? Now, you have a bad defeat.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
You can't,
Everything looks rosier after a win, and always looks the worst thing in the world after a defeat, doesn't it? I mean, you kind of touched upon next couple of questions in terms of transfers. You felt like the summer transfer business was good, but obviously could have done better. And then you've kind of touched on what we need next in the window. There's always a topic of debate on the podcast with regards to balancing immediate targets that are going to do well now, and then kind of integrating, I guess, youth and development. I mean, I guess Tieno Barry's the main case in point on that. So, well, how do the club balance that? Because we know we've got to buy younger players who maybe have a bit more of a sell-on value, but we do need players now who are going to be able to hit the ground running, and maybe that's what we've missed a little bit so far this season.
100%. I mean, I was interested saw the headline of your last podcast, which said, should Everton have the big club mentality? I think it was said. I was trying to work out what the definition of that is, because I didn't get a chance to listen to the podcast. So what was meant by that?
So on the last podcast, if it's the one you're referring to, it was me, Chris Beasley and Gavin Buckland on it. Yeah, and I think Gav was kind of expressing the point that we're not necessarily a big club who can spend a lot of money, but we're not a small club in terms of I don't know, say like a Brighton with their philosophy, or a Bournemouth with their philosophy, and a Brentford to an extent, but three teams who have established themselves in the Premier League who effectively have got really good recruitment strategies. I think my argument with that, I think everyone labels the Brighton philosophy as kind of a thing. I think my argument was, well, if you just recruit well and sell well, that should go a long way. I mean, look at Villa and Newcastle. Championship clubs a good couple of years ago, but they've bought well, and when they've been forced to sell, they've got as much money as possible. I mean, Gav's not here to defend himself, but I think he was kind of just he was questioning what are Everton and what should the philosophy be.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think what you've got to do to understand it fully, for me, is to see where we're all coming from as a club. And the things about the Brightons and the Bournemouths and the Brentfords is they've grown as they've come. So the expectations were not there originally. And I remember, I mean, I was at Blackburn when Brighton, when Brentford, who else did we mention? Bournemouth. They were all playing against Blackburn when I was there. Yeah. And that was 10 years ago, maybe. And they've sort of grown, if you like. It's been a very organic process for them. The problem you have with Everton is that the expectation was there, and is still there every season. We think, and I'm not just Neville Southall, but we think we should win the league every year. Now, don't get me wrong, we all know that we're not going to. But there's still deep down somewhere, I mean, maybe that might be different with the fans' demographic that we talked about before, the 18 to 30. But there is that expectation with Everton that they're a big club, which they are, and they should be doing much better, So with that, it throws up all kinds of problems when it comes to recruitment. And I saw the difficulty the recruitment team had in the summer, apart from the fact that, something I pointed out at the time, is that, these are all new people, new relationships happen to be formed, and there will be, whether we like it or not, there will be posturing, people's different positions and trying to get their position sorted in that recruitment setup. So we had all that to deal with, but we also had a situation where, okay, do we buy youth and projects, if you like, project players, I think they're called now, or do we buy now? Somewhere in between, you've got to balance that. I don't know how you do it, but you've got to balance that. I think possibly in the summer, okay, look, we got Grealish. Dewsbury Hall, I would suggest, was a ready-made player. But other than that, really, a lot of the players that we brought in are simply, and David Moyes, manager, said that at the time. Asnu, I think people were thinking we're buying a player from Bayern Munich, he's going to just be, he's going to knock Mikalenko out the team. Not the case. Barry, not the case. Dibbling, not the case. The lads had one season in the Premier League, So there is a difficulty, and it's a really, really fine balance. I don't know. I think what you have to do is take each player or each recruitment player on its own credit, or it's only on its own basis, its individual basis. So you've got to look and say, okay, what can this guy do for our team? What is our need? And our need at the moment is goal scoring. Now, we can't bring another Tieno Barry in for that.
No.
And we've got to get probably better than Beto, if we're being honest. That's what the fans would want. But Beto was brilliant at the end of last season, and he is very much, I think, a confidence player, and he could easily come good any time. I love him because I just love the endeavour. But it's a very difficult thing to do now with these players for the recruitment team. What do they do? And I don't think there's a simple answer. you know.
I think the concern from the podcast, obviously, that you mentioned was that there was a question mark of whether, obviously, the recruitment team are only just new and it's only really just been finalised of the people who were involved in it. There was a concern whether the recruitment team's, obviously, not philosophy as such, or what the players they want to bring in, is that aligned with what David Moyes wants to bring in? Because we know David Moyes' contract is obviously short now. It's the season after next. It's going to run out, so he's going to want players for the now. Whereas the recruitment team, obviously, they still want good players, but are they looking 2, 3, 4 years further down the line? So I think does that marry up? I think there's a question mark at this moment in time whether that does. And David Moyes, even in the summer, he was getting frustrated out in America in some of his press conferences.
Yeah, well, you could see his frustration. I mean, David Moyes wears his heart on his sleeve, you know, and you know how he feels. You don't have to be any sort of psychologist to understand what he's thinking. But what I would say is that there has to be everybody within that recruitment group, if you like, and this is the bonus and a successful recruitment, and that's what you got at Brighton. It's what you got at Brentford. You know, there was a team effort, and I think that it will be the case at Everton. But everybody's needs need to be catered for if we can, you know, and that's difficult. But I don't think, if we're looking at David Moyes' situation, I'm not so sure he is someone who just wants, you know, experience coming in and the here and now. I think David Moyes, as he showed in the past with the likes of Tim Cahill, you know, he is quite happy to, because I think one of his real talents is bringing players on and coaching players.
Yeah,
I think he's very good manager in that respect. So I think he can get the best out of younger players and bring them through, and he will do. The problem is that, going back to the way the fans feel, we're always on a knife edge, and it doesn't take too much. You know, we don't have that honeymoon period, you know, to lose a few games and have a bit of a period, because people start getting nervous, quite understandably. And I think that's the problem. So I think what you will see in January is a blend of, I think you'll see more inexperienced buys, if you like. I don't think there's any room for anything else at the moment. I think, you know, we need experience in front of goal, and I think we need Premier League experience in front of goal. I'm not so sure even somebody who's been playing at, I noticed after Ireland's exploits over the last couple of nights, you know, everybody now wants Troy Parrott in, you know, and you know, listen, I think we have to be really careful, because whilst there will be money, there's not, as you said before, you know, there's not pockets and pockets of it. So we have to be careful how we buy. But I do think you'll see experience come in rather than any of the project players. I think that'll happen again in the summer. But, you know, in fairness to that point of view, we couldn't go on just bringing in sort of 28, 30-year-old players. We could, you know, we've seen that, and it's not worked really. You know, so I think we do have to build a squad, and we do have to try and suck it up a little bit, you know, in this building. So, you know, even though we haven't got that benefit of a Brighton and a Brentford and a Bournemouth who are building, you know, it's much easier to deal with a growing team rather than a downward spiral. You know, we've had a downward spiral for some time now, and that's really difficult to manage the whole right through the club, you know, because all things pile on top of each other, you know, and that's really difficult, you know. So they have that to battle, but I think they've got the people now, you know, who can do that. And, you know, as I say, I think you'll see maybe 2-3 players come in the January, and it all depends. You know, we know it's notoriously difficult to bring in players in the January, but I think we'll see. I think a defender, a midfielder, and a striker. That's what I think will come in.
I mean, it's all about battling expectations, isn't it? I mean, we know from David Moyes' first stint, he was a little bit renowned for maybe playing down expectations because of the resource that the club had, and I think that was fair enough. I think most Evertonians would kind of agree with that. Since he's come back, he's definitely changed. He's certainly been different. He's been the expectation, probably from just his own personal point of view. He wants Everton high up the table. He wants to be back in Europe. I guess from my point of view, the disappointment of going out the cup, that was obviously a bit of a kick in the teeth. It's been a frustrating couple of weeks, but hopefully the what's his name, the 3 points against Fulham.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've had the international break, but kind of hopefully kick on a little bit now.
Yeah, well, we need to. As simple as that. You know, the League Cup thing was the Carabao Cup thing was a real disappointment. I get a real bugbear, you know, when it comes, because it's not just this one. You can go back a number of years with Everton, and they've sort of thrown away the chances, you know, down from an honours penalty to, you know, to all kinds of weak teams that they played, you know, and I just don't like it. Listen, I'm not a manager, and I don't understand the pressures that maybe they're under, but at the same time, you know, there has to be a blend of growth, but also the immediacy of results, and that's really difficult. You know, like I say, we've always got that monkey on the back of expectation, and you know, we lose 2 games, the pressure's on straight away, and I'm not so sure. You know, we need to get to a position where we can take a couple of defeats, you know, and you know, or if it happens, we can say, okay, we know we're all right. We know we're going in the right direction. I do think Everton needed to change their squad and the age of their squad. They needed to get it down, you know, and have some bright prospects coming through. You know, it's like I asked Moyes a question the other week about Iliman Ndiaye. You know, there's speculation about him. Everton have now got, the owners have got to really dig their heels in if people come. And I know, you know, it's not just about the owners. You know, if a player wants to go or whatever, it's difficult. But it's really important what perception the club gets now with this, because for a long time we've almost expected to lose our best player. You know, you can go back with Charleston, Lukaku. You know, you can name a number. You know, even back to Arteta, dare I say. You know, so. But we've got to get past that hill, because we can't keep doing that, because we're not going to go anywhere, you know. So they have to have, the owners have to have that determination and that wherewithal to you know, to make sure that we keep going forward, and you know, because it will come good with the stadium and all the rest of it. Everything's there, all the ingredients are there to become a big club again, and you know, it's not going to be easy.
Well, to finish off, I am going to put you on the spot, but before we do,
no problem.
Obviously, your new venture, we've talked about it before. Well, at the start of this podcast, so it's the Added Time podcast with your co-host Tony Grant. You've had some really good guests, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. We had Andy Burnham last week. You know, we've had. I mean, not from an Everton point of view, of course, but we had, because it's not an Everton podcast, as I said before. You know, we want to make sure that we talk all different types of areas, and we want to talk different things. We have Kean Maguire on talking about, you know, finance, which I know you guys have had him in.
John Textor as well.
John Textor was great, you know, from a sort of Sheffield Wednesday. I've got thousands of new Sheffield Wednesday fans now. You know, we had a feature on Mjällby, you know, the team from Sweden, who you know, was a little village club who won the league, and so we're neat, you know, we're looking to do that. We also had Peter Hutton on from the farm, and that was a great. I mean, that's done the best figures, to be honest, you know, and it just shows. But I think the combination of music and football in this city will always sell. You know? So we're hoping to build it, and where we go with it, I don't know, but you know, it's going well. People are enjoying it. We're getting some really nice comments. So long may that continue.
And you can find it on YouTube, Apple,
Spotify, yeah, all the usual places, you know, or just read my X account, and you know, I don't go on about anything else now these days. But
no, good stuff. Okay, put you on the spot then. Obviously, you can't name a player who's obviously passed like a Dixie Dean, but players who you've seen in the flesh, in person, your all-time Everton 11. You can do whatever formation you want. Most people go 4-4-2, old school, or you can go a modern day, you know, Everton formation now.
I'll probably go 4-4-2 because it's easier in my head at the moment. I'm not even going to start. I'm not even going to name the goalkeeper, you know, because it's just, you know, it's beyond even debate. Obviously, Neville is just a fixation, isn't he? Sort of, the defence is a difficult one, really, because, you know, I love Gary Stevens at right back, you know, and I think I can't really see anyone better than that, if I'm being honest. And it's difficult because when you look at the 80s team, you think because they were successful, they should almost automatically be in there. But, you know, that's a little bit unfair in many ways, because, there have been good players for this club who've not necessarily been in good teams. But I'm going to go with Gary Stevens. My first centre half is going to be Dave Watson, because I think Dave typifies everything, and I would love to have put Mick Lyons in there, but Dave was, he was everything, and I think he was actually underrated. Dave, won a title for us, with us, and he was, won the FA Cup with us, and he was just, if you knew him, and I have the benefit of knowing him as a person inside the club and what he did, and he's a proper captain, Dave. I've got to go with Kevin Ratcliffe on the other side. As much as there's been so many, Brian LeBone, who I watched, just loads of them, still trying to think of that fella's name. Oh God!
It'll come to you as soon as we click the
absolutely.
Stop button.
I keep wanting to say Martin Keown, but it wasn't Martin Keown,
right,
but it was something like that. It was something with a K. No, but so left back, I'm going with Leighton Baines. And again, never won anything at the club, but just a great player to watch, and brought so much to that team. The KL team and the Pienaar team, and the combination with Pienaar was brilliant.
I'm so glad you said Baines, because I had this conversation a couple of weeks back with a group of Evertonian friends, and there was 4 of us, but we were three different generations. And the left back, despite Everton obviously having a good couple of left backs dating back from to the 60s, all of us said Leighton Baines, and you said Leighton Baines as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, people look at Pat Brendan Howe, and but Pat, came into a team which was winning. They were a winning team, and that doesn't mean he wasn't a good player. He was a great player, but I just think you have to look at the things that these players bring to the club. Bainesy was just typified everything of that period. I think and really should have won a trophy. Players like Leighton Baines should have won a trophy. Simple as that. Midfield is very difficult. This has always really upset me, to be honest, because there's 2 players on the left who I want in, and I can't fit them both in, and I can't see past Kevin Sheedy. I just can't. I want Dave Thomas in there, because Dave Thomas was everything for me. He was the best out-and-out winger I saw at Goodison or at Everton. Sheeds was a bit more than an out-and-out winger. He could pick a pass through the middle, and and that's why he's in there, because whilst Dave was brilliant, you give him that ball and he'd be gone, and you knew, which actually part of the head, that Bob Latchford was going to get that ball. I saw him one game where he sent it across, Bob Latchford scored, and then there was another corner, and he sort of he gesticulated towards Bob as if to say, same place. And he did it again, right on the spot, and he scored again. It's just incredible, the intuition between the two. So Kevin Sheedy gets it. I'm going with Reedy in the middle, because I think he was exactly what we needed at the time. He was... I remember sitting in a stand at Stoke, and Reedy wasn't being picked, and he was in the stand, would you believe, with us in the crowd. And I said, how come? I couldn't believe I was sitting next but one to Peter Reid. I said, how come you're not on the... He said, well, it's either that or sit on the bench with them lot. And it was just before it all kicked off, and you just got the sense, that it wasn't good there. There was, because obviously we know it was difficult. Just before that exploded. So Reedy was so influential, and there's been some great midfielders. And the next one will probably surprise you, but I'm going for Martin Dobson.
Okay, yeah.
Because I want a bit of grace in there, and a bit of flair, a bit of class, And Martin Dobson was like, he could have wore slippers and looked good, Martin. He would stroke the ball around. He was calm. And he'd score a goal. So for me, I'm going for Tricky Trev on the right. I have to, he was such a great player on the right-hand side. There'd be many more, but no, Trevor Steven was the man. And the 2 up front is so easy. Sharpie has to be in there, for his goals, because he could score with every part of his body sharp, you know, and he scored spectacular goals as well, which was fantastic. And the other one, of course, is my old man, Bob Latchford. You know, he gave me so much joy in the 70s when we really didn't have much joy to talk about. You know, he was that thing where you could, you know, when you look at players and you think you can count on him. You know, you could count on Bob Latchford scoring a goal. You know, and I again, my biggest travesty was I wasn't there for the 30th goal. You know, and I hate the fact that I wasn't there for that. You know, because I think I'd seen 28 of them or whatever it was. Because I think he scored 2 on the last day, didn't he? But I was actually working in a fish and chip shop for that last game. And
couldn't get it off shift.
What was it? No, we couldn't get it off shift. And what was bizarre was when he scored, I was peeling potatoes in the back, right? And when he scored, I fell to my knees and did this, you know. And then the next day in the papers he was doing exactly the same. And I thought, I wonder if I had some sort of intuition from him, you know. Yeah. And it really made me laugh, you know, because I remember falling, you know, because the guy who owned the chip shop, the Greek guy, you know, he's looking at, what are you doing? What are you, you know, he thought I was mad, you know. But it was just brilliant because, and that typified that period, the fact that we were on our knees because someone had scored 30 goals, you know, and not won an FA Cup or not won a, you know, but he was brilliant.
Alan, I don't want to keep any longer. We've fantastic chat. We've covered a whole host of topics, and I really enjoyed this. So thank you so much for coming on the Royal Blue podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Ian.